And good afternoon. Let's do some business. We are doing it live right here, doing more at 4 weekday afternoons. We get right down to business with the news-driven hour right after Ben Shapiro and just before the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang at 5. Mottek on Money, live on the air, 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com. And your on-demand Mottek on Money podcast, kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Well, we saw a mixed start to the new holiday-shortened week on Wall Street with the NASDAQ extending its record run-up today. The S&P 500 eking out a slight gain, and the Dow tumbled more than 200 points to start the week, coming off the three-day Memorial Day holiday weekend as the market got hit by rising Treasury yields today, while the Minneapolis Fed Bank President Neil Kashkari, the former Republican candidate for governor here in California years ago, said he would not rule out further interest rate hikes if price pressures tick up again. And we have seen upward pressure on oil prices today. Investors also reacting to the latest economic news that showed consumer confidence rebounded in the month of May after 3 months of declines, but worries about inflation persist. The Dow coming in for a closing loss of 217 points, selling at 38,852, pulling back some more from its recent all-time high, which was above 40,000. The S&P 500 eked out a gain of 1 point. The NASDAQ started the day as tech names continue to rally, closing up 99 points to settle at 17,020. That's the 12th record close of the year for the NASDAQ. And, yep, you heard me, above 17,000, the first time in history that the NASDAQ has finished above 17,000, boosted by a nearly 7% jump in shares of, you want to take a guess? Yep, NVIDIA. The yield in the 10-year note has seen its biggest one-day pop in nearly a month at 4.56% here at the moment. Crude oil futures moving higher with the benchmark, global benchmark Brent crude at its highest price seen in a month on the latest tensions in the Middle East tied to Israel and expectations that major oil producers meeting this weekend will extend output cuts into the third quarter of the year. We saw West Texas Intermediate crude oil in New York trading higher by nearly 3% today, more than $2 to $79.83 a barrel. That's the highest we've seen since May 17th. Some of the fuel-sensitive stocks also took a hit today, namely American Airlines Group, slashing its guidance for the current quarter, roughly 1 month after offering an upbeat assessment for the 3-month period, which includes the summer air travel season here in the U.S. Shares of American dropped about 8% in after-hours trading after entering the regular trading day, down about 3%. United Airlines stock also pulling back about 2%. Among the casualties of the day, shares of pharmaceutical company Moderna turned out to be the S&P 500's worst performer today as vaccine stocks gave up some of their recent bird flu gains. Moderna stock down about 10% this afternoon on pace for the biggest percentage drop since late 2022. This after the vaccine names popped last week on reports of new human bird flu cases in the United States as well as in Australia. Some analysts viewed those gains as an overreaction to headlines similar to the trading around reports of new variants during the COVID pandemic. Another shocking crime in Los Angeles, this one focused in the downtown area. An actor was murdered, shot and killed on a street in downtown Los Angeles over the weekend after he confronted some people stealing the catalytic converter under his car. The suspect's still on the loose. Loved ones are outraged, calling for changes. Meanwhile, part-time L.A. area resident Judge Judy is speaking out about progressive district attorneys for ruining major cities. I'll talk about that, and I'll talk about that with the Honorable Dennis Zine this afternoon, former L.A. City Council member, former LAPD sergeant, and current LAPD Reserve Officer Dennis Zine will be on the line with us later this hour. California Senate has passed a bill to add speed governors, speed regulators to all new cars. Meanwhile, the EV push is getting pushed back from consumers, and now come to find out the copper supply will not be sufficient to enable a smooth transition to electric vehicles based on the current government push timetables. I'll talk about that with Lauren Fix, editor-in-chief of Car Coach and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, and the whole works now. Joining us live, Gabriel Wisdom, money manager and managing director of American Money Management, based here in Southern California. Also the author of Wisdom on Value Investing is the book. Gabriel Wisdom, thank you very much for coming to the line.
Well, Frank, my pleasure. You mentioned NVIDIA, and that stock is up so dramatically. It's up about 2,600% in the last 5 years. That's against 120% gain for the NASDAQ, which just hit 17,000. And this company has little trouble incentivizing investors to get excited about chips. It's chips ahoy here, but NVIDIA's really the 800-pound gorilla, and they're going to be splitting their shares 10 for 1. So for every share of NVIDIA you have, you'll get 10 shares. Now, it's just division. It's like, making your pizza into 8 slices instead of 4. You're not going to get any fuller, but the number of NVIDIA shares, it does increase, but it's easier for investors to buy smaller pieces of companies, and it's easier for professional portfolio managers to add to diversified portfolios. So for this reason, when stocks split like NVIDIA, Walmart did in February, they tend to do pretty well after a stock split. So looks like we're going to have a pretty decent June.
NVIDIA taking the spotlight today, hitting a record high, closing up another $74 and change, and has blown past 1,100 now at $1,139.01 a share for NVIDIA, the so-called Magnificent One, the one that set off that AI rally last year and has led the Magnificent Seven. We call it the Magnificent One since some of the Mag 7 have fallen off the Magnificent category here. It was down to the Gang of Four or the Fab Four. And then and now let's talk about NVIDIA some more here following their earnings news last week. We saw this latest rally here. And you mentioned the stock split. Have they come up with a timetable as when that stock split will take place? And what's your outlook on NVIDIA here?
Well, my outlook is pretty decent, though. There's an old saying that there's no such thing as bad investments. They're just bad prices. Well, is NVIDIA too high a price? Is it a bad investment because it's gone up 2,600% in the last 5 years? If you compare NVIDIA to the dot-com darling of 1999, 2000, which was Cisco Systems, Cisco was selling at 100 times its earnings, 100 times price earnings multiple, and NVIDIA forward earnings now at only 30 times price earnings multiple. Frank, that's how strong this artificial intelligence boom is and the chips that they make. And by the way, it's probably very similar to what happened with internet technology, the related hardware and software, mimicking what happened in the 1990s. And Goldman Sachs is saying that it will increase labor productivity rather than reduce the labor count.
Right. So AI is still evolving, and of course, the focus of attention at all the business conferences nowadays. What about good old Apple, which was up 1 cent today at 189 and change? Apple, of course, was the Wall Street darling before NVIDIA burst on the scene here. What about Apple here?
Well, Apple saw iPhone sales increase in China. That's a very positive sign. Plus, Apple has been behind the 8 ball on the AI rollout, along with Alphabet. However, they may be a little bit late to the party, but they won't be forgotten. The free cash flow at Apple is enormous. It's the same thing that's happening with other companies, major companies. They're dedicating 50 to 70% of their free cash flow to increasing the dividend and buying back shares. That's good for shareholders.
All right. What about some of the other names, the Magnificent Seven? I'm sure I'll be talking about Tesla later this hour with our go-to car expert, Lauren Fix, about what's happening on the EV scene. Tesla is at a very bumpy ride this year. What about Tesla here?
It's funny. Tesla absorbed the solar panel company and the battery storage company, Solar City, which was an Elon Musk company. And the SEC took some exception to using a company controlled by Musk to buy another company controlled by Musk, since they're both public entities with lots of other owners. But this Tesla Energy Operations works with residential, commercial, industrial customers, and it's massive. And so there's a lot of embedded value in Tesla well beyond the electric vehicle market.
Certainly. Tesla down more than $2 today at 176 and change. Interesting to see the tech heavy NASDAQ continuing to rally to record highs while the Dow is pulled back. About 1,200 points from its most recent high. Any observations related to all that since you're focused?
Welcome to Talkville, the ultimate Smallville rewatch podcast. Guest star Sarah Carter as Alicia Baker, although I didn't really work with her a lot. But Tom did, and they had some real big smoochy scenes.
Yeah. Can we talk about that?
Could there be any more sex? What was a 3-page makeout scene that just kept going? Good Lord. We get it. They have chemistry.
Jump in now or catch up on any of the past seasons of Talkville on YouTube or wherever you listen.
On value and cover the overall market so closely. What's going on here?
It's kind of funny, Frank. We hit 40,000 for the Dow Jones Industrial Averages, and there was a lot of celebration there. Now the Dow was at 30,000 only 3.5 years ago. So it took 3.5 years to go from 30,000 to 40,000. The fact is that it's only 30 companies. And it reflects none of the movements of some of these darlings that you're mentioning, like NVIDIA, Meta, Alphabet. Of course, Microsoft is in the Dow Jones averages. But oddly, the Dow and the S&P 500 companies have pretty much moved, for the most part, over the long run, in lockstep. So where are the real values? I'd have to say some of the forgotten names in the Dow 30, companies that have been left behind that will be splitting their shares, and some that dropped off the Dow 30. Those 30 companies have they've been replaced and changed many times since the Dow began in 1896. But many of the drop-offs continue to do very well.
All right, and relatively speaking, these fallen angels, are you doing any bottom fishing here?
I am, Frank. One that I like is American Tower. This is a real estate investment trust, but it doesn't own real estate assets like apartment buildings or office buildings, but it trades like other real estate investment trusts. It's sensitive to interest rates, so it's sold off quite dramatically. They own the tower sites for transmission towers like KABC, which might be a tenant of American Tower. Thousands of radio and television stations and cell tower sites rent from American Tower because they own and operate these cell sites, which are very difficult to create from ground up. That symbol is AMT. I'm looking at that. Then there's GE Aerospace. General Electric split into 3 companies: GE Vernova, GE Healthcare Technologies, and then there's GE Aerospace. And the airplane industry is in the midst of a very strong self-reinforcing growth cycle. And GE Aerospace is dedicated to returning some 70% of its free cash flow to shareholders through dividends and share buybacks. I like that.
All right. What about the airlines, which are taking a hit here? Obviously, fuel costs are still very high. You would think that the airlines would be doing better given this immense return to travel coming off the pandemic and all that. But we see American Airlines taking a hit today. What are your thoughts about these travel names here?
Those airlines are so essential to our economy that Congress has established something similar to stock warrants, which can be exercised. And bottom line is it's a bailout provision for airlines when and if they need some help. That's how essential they are. But are they great investments? No. And the reason is they need to keep buying new plants and equipment from the likes of companies like GE Aerospace. GE makes the LEAP engine made through a joint venture with Safran. It's got more thrust, it's more fuel efficient, but these are very costly upgrades that all the airlines are forced to make. And so it's a very difficult industry, but not for the companies that provide these engines and these components.
All right. Any other specific places where you would be putting money now and or taking it off the table?
Frank, the electric generation situation is rather dire with AI, with electric vehicle charging stations. And currently electricity generation results in some 32% of carbon dioxide emissions in the United States because they burn oil and gas and coal. So I like the whole energy complex, including the major utility companies. Utilities have also sold off because they're sensitive to interest rates. I think you could own a utilities exchange traded fund that would own the likes of Net Extra Energy, Duke Energy, Dominion Energy, Exelon Corporation, those kinds of companies, and the traditional oil and gas names.
Terrific. Well, Gabriel, thank you very much for kicking off the new week here following the 3-day holiday weekend and giving us your thorough assessment of things here. It's always a pleasure. That is Gabriel Wisdom, Money Manager and Managing Director at American Money Management, based here in Southern California, author of Wisdom on Value Investing. Thank you very much for joining us live here. Mottek on Money on 790 KBC.
We are doing it live right here on Mottek on Money on 790 KBC. The Dow coming in for a closing loss of 217 points to 38,853. The S&P 500 up 1 at 5306, and the Nasdaq gained 99 points at 17,020. The yield in the 10-year note now at 4.56%. Once again, NVIDIA, the star of the day, propelling the Nasdaq to new highs. We see NVIDIA shares of more than $74 today at $1,139.01 per share. Ralph Lauren shares popping today as well, up nearly $8 at $181 and change. The Nasdaq stands at a record high, closing above 17,000 for the very first time. Checking the cryptos now, Bitcoin up 157 at 68,526, Ethereum up 23 at 3,851, and Doge steady at 17 cents. Friends, people like you and me have our ear to the ground on all things business. We like to be informed and indeed well prepared. Just as important as finance is, I want you to have a plan in case you're hit by someone not paying attention to the road. Thinking ahead serves us well. Even still, we can get caught off guard as people are so focused on their destination that they might not have a plan if they're in an accident that's not their fault. That's why I encourage you to put my friend Attorney Clark Fielding's number in your phone. That number is 833-88-SHARK. So if you're in an accident, you'll be ready with your strategy to make Clark Fielding your very first call. Fielding Law aims for the highest possible settlement, considering you might need long-term care, rehab, compensation for lost wages, and any ongoing physical or emotional pain. So if you're hurt in any kind of accident, call for a free consultation with Fielding Law. You can trust them. They're honest, respected, and your strategy in case you get into that unexpected accident. Motorcycle, truck, pedestrian, scooter, hit and run, boating, or bike accidents, you name it. The number to call, 833-88-SHARK. That's 833-88-SHARK, or go to clarkthesharklaw.com. Mottek on Money continues here in 790 KBC. Another shocking crime right in the heart of Los Angeles. This time an actor was murdered, shot, and killed on a street in downtown L.A. over the weekend after he confronted some people stealing the catalytic converter under his car. His loved one outraged and calling for changes. Former General Hospital actor Johnny Wachter was fatally shot in downtown L.A. while interrupting a catalytic converter theft. The shooting happened at about 3 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday in the area of West Pico Boulevard and South Hope Street. LAPD investigators say 3 men were trying to steal a catalytic converter when the car's owner approached them. Scarlett Wachter telling ABC7 that her 37-year-old son was leaving work at a downtown rooftop bar and was walking with one of his co-workers when he saw what looked like someone working on his car. He initially thought his car was being towed, she said, and he approached the person to ask if that was the case. But when the suspect looked up, he was wearing a mask and opened fire. 3 suspects fled in a vehicle, according to the LAPD. Paramedics brought Wachter to a local hospital where he was pronounced dead. Joining us live now, the Honorable Dennis ZINE, former LA City Council member, former LAPD sergeant, and current LAPD reserve officer. Dennis ZINE, your reaction to this tragedy there in downtown LA over the weekend?
Frank, it is absolutely outrageous that this type of crime can occur in the city of Los Angeles. 2022, 8,000 catalytic converters were reported stolen. 8,000. This is one example of what happens when the criminal element in Los Angeles runs free to commit crime and doesn't even get a slap on the wrist by the district attorney, George Gascon. This is a tragedy. A man in the prime of his life that gets shot and killed for a catalytic converter. It is absolutely unconscionable that we could have this happen in the city of Los Angeles over and over and over. And of the 8,000 that were reported stolen, I'm sure there's more that were not even reported stolen. This is just one of the many crimes that affects the people of the city of Los Angeles. You have a police department that is understaffed. You have city council members that don't support the police. And you have these types of tragedies that occur. And on top of this, if you don't have a car and you ride the public transit, then you're now susceptible to crimes that occur on the public transit system. I mean, the city is falling apart when it comes to crime and safety for men, women, children. And we have politicians that aren't doing their job, a district attorney not doing his job, and the people throw their hands up and say, when's it going to change? When's it going to get better? When is change going to come about? It is so depressing to look at the statistics and think about the consequences. And the fact today they honored the 239 fallen police officers, Los Angeles Police Department. 239 men and women have been killed in the line of duty in the city of Los Angeles in recent years. This is absolutely unconscionable. But these problems continue over and over and over. People need to wake up and start understanding you want to live in a good city, you want to live in a safe city, do something about it, and don't just ignore it. Don't ignore these tragedies. And if there is a crime, report it. Take the time to report it. You can do it online. It's very, very important for people to do that. It just tears my heart apart when I read these stories and see what happens, the aftermath, when it's a lawless society.
Very, very tough news. And we're on the line with the Honorable Dennis Zine, former L.A. City Council member, former LAPD sergeant, longtime LAPD reserve officer with 56-plus years of service to the City of Angels. And I don't know if you saw it, but on Fox News, days after this tragedy, Johnny Walker's ex-fiancée spoke out and pleaded with L.A. elected officials to make changes and put an end to the rising crime of the city. All of the networks should be carrying this, of course. And how are these catalytic converter cases handled these days? If somebody is arrested for stealing a catalytic converter, and now they sell these things because of the metals in them, right? And you mentioned thousands have been stolen here, and people had to suffer the consequences of dealing with all of this. But what happens to these people?
Well, the courts don't treat it with a lot of seriousness is the problem.
John brings his skewed sense of humor. Jeff brings tips to cut strokes off your next round. Together, it's those weekend golf guys.
They'll pay a lot of money to PXG and Titleist and Callaway and on and on and on, right? How many yards do you think you're going to pick up with that extra driver? I think I can get an extra 5 to 10. What if I give you 15 to 20? You pay me more.
Jeff Smith teaches on a sliding scale.
Those Weekend Golf Guys, the podcast, part of the Believe Network. Just search BLEAV on YouTube or wherever you listen.
They've passed some laws in California that the shops that get these, if they can't determine it's a legal catalytic converter being taken away, then there's consequences on the shop. So they have some enforcement, but I don't know how enforcement takes place, but they do have some laws. As far as stealing it to replace it, and many of the listeners, I'm sure, have had theirs stolen. It's over $1,000 if you can find one. And Toyota in particular, they like to steal them from the Toyotas. And it's just a continuing problem. They're stealing it not for the converter, but for the guts of the converter, that the precious metals that they utilize and they sell and they make money on it. So it's just another act of thievery, whether it's a smash and grab at a store or stealing a catalytic converter or whatever the case may be. These are thieves taking the action illegally and getting away with it for the most part. This particular tragedy hit the news, but I'm sure there's many of them where we don't read about it, we don't hear about it, but it happens and there's a victim. And that's the problem. There's a lot of victims. Those are the people that we never hear from. But I can't emphasize how important it is to make that police report so they can at least document what is occurring in the city of Los Angeles, just as they've documented since the LAPD was formed, the 239 officers. And yesterday we had honor of our military veterans that passed, protecting what America's about. So, Frank, there's a lot of social issues, a lot of problems. We know we have elections coming up, but I can't emphasize enough, if you want to be safe for you and your family, you must get involved politically and do something to try and support the police, give them the resources they need. And those elected officials that do not support the police, if they don't support the police, they're not supporting you and safety for you and your family. That's very.
We honor the memory of all of the fallen LAPD officers you mentioned, and of course, we salute all of our service personnel and combat fallen who were honored on the Memorial Day weekend, and that spectacular, majestic, momentous Memorial Day service always at the LA National Cemetery, where the Boy Scouts that we talked about on Friday placed American flags on each of the more than 90,000 graves there at the LA National Cemetery, and we certainly honor the memory of all. Getting back to the important point that you mentioned, even when people are arrested by the police, and God bless them for doing the job that they're doing, then there's this revolving door system that we've talked about. Even Judge Judy, the famous TV judge, has also just delivered a scathing verdict on progressive DAs, which he says are ruining U.S. cities, including Los Angeles, believes they need to fill other jobs like fill ice cream cones someplace. That's what Judge Judy was quoted as saying recently during an interview. What is happening here, Dennis Zine, with the system here now under the current DA, and what do we need to do about that?
Well, let me comment, Judge Judy. I read that article, and I really thought she was right on target. If people get a chance to read it, it's very important to read what Judge Judy says. She's an actual judge who is now a TV judge, but her reflection of the system, how it's fallen apart. Gascon is the problem, clear and simple. If we get rid of him, we can eliminate a lot of the problems. It's one person who's holding up justice in the city and the county of Los Angeles, plain and simple. Gascon needs to go.
And in this case, there was a choice, right? In November, he'll be facing a runoff with veteran federal prosecutor Nathan Hochman.
Nathan Hochman, I've met. I know he's a good man. He will turn it around. And when you have a district attorney's office, when you have 90+% of your employees vote against you, that tells you something. His own employees don't support him. You would become a prosecutor because you want to put bad guys in jail. You become a police officer because you want to make the streets safe. This is what it's about. So people who choose that profession, they need to get support from the administration, and that's the leader of the organization. Gascon failed in that mission. He's continuing to fail, and we are all potential victims of his failures. His failures are potential victims. That's exactly what it turns out to be.
Now, individuals and businesses looking for ways to protect themselves given the current environment. When you go to a grocery store nowadays, oftentimes you'll see armed security at the door with batons also, I noticed this past weekend. And what's your advice for individuals and businesses looking to protect themselves out there, Dennis Zine?
Well, they need to do what they need to do to protect themselves. I know many people have contacted me about a CCW, carry concealed weapons. Under the Second Amendment, you can get a weapon, you can get licensed, you can carry it, et cetera. There's a long process you have to go through. But many people are so fearful for themselves, their families, that they're purchasing weapons. I don't think we need to have a gun society, but clearly with what we have happening in the crime and violence, you need to protect you and your family. And many people, that's the way they go. You call the police, the 911, rings 5-10 times before someone answers. A police car will be there in 15 to 20 minutes. A lot of things can happen in that period of time. We are understaffed in dispatchers for the police. We're understaffed in police officers on the streets of Los Angeles. Clear and simple, we have a problem, and people need to wake up if they want to continue to stay alive in this city of Los Angeles.
The Honorable Dennis Zine on the line with us here on Mottek on Money on 790 KABC, former Los Angeles City Council member, former LAPD sergeant, and current LAPD reserve officer with something like 56 years of service. We salute you for your service to the City of Angels, Dennis Zine. Thank you very much for coming to the line.
Thank you, Frank, and please be safe, everyone. Thank you.
Yes, please do, and thank you very much, Dennis Zine. Mottek on Money continues here in 790 KABC. Did you hear about this? In Sacramento, they've passed a bill to add speed governors or speed regulators to all new cars. The California Senate passing this bill. Some lawmakers and car aficionados are saying not so fast with pushing this thing. Meanwhile, the EV push is getting pushed back from consumers, and now come to find out the copper supply will not be sufficient to enable a transition to electric vehicles based on the current government push timetables. Let's bring in Lauren Fix now, editor-in-chief of Car Coach and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast and our go-to car expert here on 790 KABC. Lauren, thank you very much for taking the call here. First of all, your reaction now to what the lawmakers have done there in Sacramento.
Oh, I couldn't believe I actually read this. I mean, the bill is going to require new cars to beep when you're speeding 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. And many times on the highway, especially if you're on some of these faster-moving highways, traffic is moving along at 70 and the speed limit's 55, so you have to go along with the flow of traffic, or you're going to end up causing an accident. Well, then your horn will be going off, your lights will be going flashing. I mean, it's ridiculous. Now, it depends how far they decide to go. Initially, it's supposed to be a beep inside the car for just you, with a light notifying you that you're over the speed limit every time you continually go over the 10-mile-an-hour speed limit, 10 miles over the speed limit. However, there is one of the legislators that would like to turn it into a horn beeping so that oncoming traffic knows that you're speeding and potential pedestrians know you're speeding so that they don't walk out in front of you. And they want lights flashing too, much like that of an emergency vehicle. Well, that would really confuse other drivers on the road. And sometimes when you allow government officials to make ridiculous laws, they go as far as they can to see if you're going to push back. And now is the time to push back to say this is an unreasonable law, because they're going to say 50% of the cars have to be converted by 2029, and by 2032, 100% of the cars that are sold that are new will have this governor on it that will say, hey, you're speeding. I know what's going to happen is people aren't going to buy cars. Unless they really, really need one, they're either going to find a way to bypass it, or they're just not going to purchase a new vehicle, which is going to hurt the industry. And besides that, cars will get more expensive because someone's going to pay for this technology. It isn't just a line of code and they put that in, and then that is what it is. This will be certainly an increase in cost, because we're never going to build one car just for California and the rest of the 49 states get something different. That's not going to happen. However, I think there's going to be a lot of pushback on this, because people that are now hearing about it after the bill was passed, no one knew anything about it beforehand, are pretty upset, and they should be.
On the line with Lauren Fix, our go-to car expert, editor-in-chief of Car Coach, and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast. I noticed in this bill, police cars and fire trucks are exempt from these speed governors, so at least they put that in there.
That's at least good, yes. And if you want to follow it, it's SB 961. S as in Sam, B as in boy, 961. And it's very similar to what the European Union is trying to put into place as well. They're getting a lot of pushback. And I'm surprised it's being supported. This bill is being supported by the National Transportation Safety Board, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the American Automobile Association, or AAA, as we know them. And it's going to pass the Assembly, and we believe it will, on August 31st. Once it's in play, cars get more expensive because they'll raise the price well before the vehicles have to be changed, and they'll start putting this into play. I've seen this type of highway-type assistance or speed assistance limiters that are there now, and maybe they'll give you a notification, a visual. If you want it on, it's your choice, turn it on or turn it off. In this case, it will be mandatory to be on. And then somebody also said, and when I posted this video on my Car Coach Reports YouTube channel, someone commented, well, I guess the police won't be busy giving out tickets any longer, will they? That's highly likely, because we'll know who you are by your horn beeping and your lights flashing.
Right. Well, not surprised your AAA is in support of this, because it's an insurance company. People don't realize it, but look it up. AAA is an insurance company. Let me ask you this regarding what's happening with this push to EVs and now focus. By the way, it looks like we're talking about this tragedy in downtown Los Angeles involving a catalytic converter that was stolen, and a young actor was shot and killed when he confronted the thieves over the weekend. But now it looks like some Tesla charging stations in some of these places have been also the subject of thievery for their copper, and now a copper supply suddenly back in the spotlight here with copper prices at a record high. Tell us more about that and its impact here on this EV push.
Well, first, it's really a sad situation that someone has to die over a catalytic converter. If someone's going to take it and it's your life versus a catalytic converter, let them take the darn converter. You can always buy another one. You can always get another car. We can't get you back. So I know that we all react instantaneously when things like this happen to ourselves or other people that we know. So I think sometimes you have to kind of have the wits about you to say, okay, we don't want this to happen. You can call the police, like you were saying with your previous guest. But the other choice is just let them take the converter. It's why you have insurance. It's not worth losing your life. As far as the copper, they are stealing them from the charging stations, not just Tesla, but all of them. So when you go to plug in your car, that electricity conducted from the charging station to your vehicle goes through these heavy copper cables, and the copper has gone up in value. So thieves are stealing them, much like catalytic converters, and they're selling them on a secondary market. Now, if you're looking to make money, you take a couple of those cords and I've seen there's tons of pictures online of kids taking off on their bicycles, and they know someone who will give them cash, and they use that cash for drugs or whatever else. But unfortunately, because the crime, although it's more than $1,000 for that cable, good luck finding somebody who's going to find these kids and arrest them. So again, that's part of what you were talking about with your previous guest that needs to be addressed in order to stop this type of activity. But as far as copper in itself, if you're thinking about investing, you might be a little late to the market on it, but monitor the cost of copper. I'm not giving you financial advice because that's not what I do. But I've been monitoring the metals markets, and they're up quite high, including palladium, which is used in catalytic converters. We saw gold and silver was up today as well. And part of that is all these metals are used in some form or some fashion in technology, also in cars. So you're going to see all this go up, and we can only mine so much. And again, this is one of the things. Where does the rest of the materials come from? They come from China. So that's
that too. Lauren Fix, we have to stop there. Thank you very much, Lauren, for joining us live here, editor-in-chief of Car Coach and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast. It turns out the copper supply, according to one report we saw today, will not be even sufficient to enable a transition to EVs based on the current government-pushed timetables, too. We'll add that to the tally. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang, and I'll be back with more at 4 tomorrow here on Mottek on Money on 790 KBC.
The Bigger Pockets portfolio of podcasts are worthy of your investment.
We're having a real conversation as real estate investors.
New episodes available every day.
It's important to buy where it makes money and not necessarily where you want to travel to.
Bigger Pockets, On the Market, Rookie Real Estate, or Money Podcast.
The purpose of flipping is to create more cash so then you can reinvest into other types of properties.
The Bigger Pockets Podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen.